The atmosphere inside Harrison Holdings felt unusually tense that Monday morning. From the marble lobby to the executive floor overlooking downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, employees traded whispers whenever the elevators opened. Everyone had heard the news. Henry Harrison had hired a new personal assistant. For most companies, that would have meant nothing. At Harrison Holdings, it meant someone had apparently forgotten to explain Henry's strangest rule. For almost 20 years, the wealthy chief executive had avoided physical contact with women. No handshakes, no friendly embraces, not even the casual touch of an arm during conversation. Employees had learned to respect the invisible boundary around him. Some called it arrogance. Others blamed an old heartbreak. Nobody knew the entire truth. Sarah Adams certainly did not. She arrived carrying a notebook, 2 pens, and enough nervous confidence to convince herself that working for one of the most demanding businessmen in North Carolina could not possibly be worse than her previous job. Within an hour, Executive Secretary Alice Bennett hurried toward her. "Sarah, Mr. Harrison needs a tie before the investor meeting." Sarah glanced toward Henry's office. "Which tie?" Alice was already walking away. "Use your judgment." That turned out to be terrible advice. Inside Henry's private wardrobe were dozens of ties, arranged with military precision. Sarah chose navy, reconsidered, selected gray, changed her mind again, then finally carried several choices into his office. Henry stood beside the windows, adjusting his cuffs. He looked at the collection in her arms. What is all that? Insurance against choosing badly. His expression remained unreadable. One tie would have been sufficient. "So I'm learning." She placed them down and selected a navy one. Henry accepted it and began forming the knot. Sarah watched for several seconds before wincing. "You're doing that wrong." Henry stopped. "I have been tying my own ties for years. That makes this much worse." Before either of them thought about what she was doing, Sarah stepped forward. "Here." Her fingers brushed his collar as she corrected the knot. Henry froze. The change was immediate. His shoulders tightened. His breathing stopped. Then he stepped backward, as though the floor had shifted beneath him. Sarah stared. "What happened?" "You touched me." She glanced at her hand. "Yes, apparently I survived." His face showed no amusement. "Never do that again." Something in his voice erased her smile. This was not irritation. It was fear. Sarah lowered her hands. "All right, I won't." Henry looked away, struggling to regain the calm for which he was famous. "You may go." She reached the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, the tie looks better." After she left, Henry raised a hand toward the place where her fingers had touched his neck. Nothing had happened. That was the problem. For years, unexpected contact had filled him with immediate discomfort. Yet Sarah's touch had produced something completely different: surprise, warmth, and an alarming awareness of how close she had been. Outside, Sarah had barely reached her desk when Mason Foster from finance approached with his coffee. "You survived." She frowned. "Was I supposed to fight something?" "You touched him, didn't you?" Sarah slowly turned. "How do you know?" Mason nearly dropped his cup. "You actually did. I fixed his tie." Mason stared as though she had announced she had climbed the company headquarters without ropes. "No woman touches Henry Harrison. That would have been useful information before I walked into his office. He hasn't allowed it in almost 20 years. Sarah looked toward the closed door. Her irritation disappeared. "What happened to him?" Mason shrugged. "Nobody knows." Inside, Henry was asking himself a more troubling question. Why had Sarah been different? Later that afternoon, he devised a ridiculous experiment disguised as work. He summoned Sarah and asked her to deliver a report directly into his hand. Their fingertips brushed. Again came the strange rush. Not disgust, not panic. Something almost forgotten. Henry pulled the report away so quickly that several pages slipped to the floor. Both bent to retrieve them and lightly bumped foreheads. Sarah struggled not to laugh. Excellent teamwork. Henry straightened. That was accidental. Of course. She studied him. You're nervous. I do not get nervous. Sarah lifted one hand as though she might touch his sleeve. Henry retreated instantly. Her smile widened. For a man who never gets nervous, you move remarkably fast. Sarah. All right. She headed for the door, smiling to herself. Henry remained behind his desk, watching her leave. For almost 20 years he had built a life around control. In less than one day, Sarah Adams had found the first crack in it. Henry decided the simplest solution was distance. Unfortunately, Sarah seemed to exist everywhere. He noticed her laughing beside the coffee station, arguing quietly with a spreadsheet, tapping a pen against her chin while reading contracts, and muttering to herself whenever technology refused to cooperate. One afternoon, he passed her desk unnoticed. Whoever designed this filing system, Sarah whispered to her computer, clearly hated happiness. Henry stopped. She continued. And if I make one mistake, Mr. Harrison will probably stare at me until I turn into dust. He returned to his office before she saw the brief smile on his face. Hours later, he discovered a formatting error in her financial report and summoned her. Sarah entered cautiously. You called me like the building was burning. Henry held up the report. What is wrong with this? She inspected it. The second table is slightly misaligned. Exactly. Sarah waited. Henry waited. Finally, she said, Nobody has ever been financially ruined because a column moved half an inch. That is not the point. I'll fix it. She turned toward the door. Henry spoke without thinking. Do you always talk to yourself? Sarah stopped. Slowly, she faced him. You heard that? Yes. Her expression became horrified. This is terrible. Why? Because I was trying to appear normal during my first week. For the first time, Henry almost laughed. Sarah noticed. Was that nearly a smile? No. It absolutely was. Go fix the report. She left looking victorious. Henry sat down and realized the danger was no longer merely physical contact. He liked talking to her. That night, memories he had buried returned. Long before Harrison Holdings became a national company, Henry had trusted someone completely. Audrey Collins had been charming, intelligent, and ambitious. Henry believed they were building a future together. He imagined marriage, children, ordinary Sunday mornings, things he had never admitted wanting. Then he discovered she had been using his connections while developing a relationship with a wealthier, more influential investor. When Henry confronted her, Audrey did not apologize. She told him love was useful only when it improved one's life. Her final words wounded him more deeply than the betrayal itself. You were never enough. Something inside Henry changed. He began associating affection with manipulation. Touch became uncomfortable, because it reminded him of promises he no longer trusted. Eventually, avoidance became habit. Habit became reputation, and reputation became a fortress. For 2 decades, the fortress worked. Until Sarah. The following morning, Henry approached her desk with renewed determination. From now on, our relationship will remain strictly professional. Sarah looked up from a granola bar. I assumed employment already worked that way. No unnecessary conversations, no jokes, no physical contact. She stared. Do you think I'm trying to seduce you? Henry nearly choked. I said nothing of the sort. You're acting like I'm a national security threat. Just follow the boundaries. Sarah studied him, then nodded. Fine. And she did. For the rest of the day, she became perfectly professional. No jokes. No teasing. No questions beyond work. Henry hated every minute of it. By late afternoon, he entered his office carrying 2 coffees. He summoned her. When Sarah arrived, he offered one. She looked suspicious. "You bought me coffee?" The barista made an extra one. "The exact kind I drink?" Henry stared at his desk. Coincidence. Sarah accepted the cup. Of course. The following week brought a charity auction at a historic hotel near Charlotte City Center. Henry was expected to attend with someone representing the company. He could have invited another executive. Instead, he walked to Sarah's desk. "You're attending tonight." She blinked. "With you?" "Yes." What happened to unnecessary proximity? This is business. Your definition of business is becoming fascinating. That evening, Henry arrived outside Sarah's apartment and briefly forgot whatever he had intended to say. She wore an elegant dark dress, her usually pinned hair falling loosely around her shoulders. Sarah noticed his silence. "Problem?" "No." "You stared." "I did not." Good start to our strictly professional evening. At the auction, Sarah quickly understood why Henry disliked elite gatherings. Conversations sounded friendly, but often concealed negotiations, rivalries, and judgments. Then a woman approached. Henry's entire posture changed. "Audrey." Sarah immediately understood. Audrey examined her. "I'm surprised Henry brought someone." Sarah calmly linked her arm through his. He needed someone capable of keeping him tolerable. Henry stiffened at the contact, but he did not pull away. Audrey noticed. Her confident expression faltered. After she left, Henry looked at Sarah. "That was unnecessary. She was trying to make you uncomfortable. And you decided to fight her?" "No. I decided she wasn't important enough to win." Those words followed Henry long after the auction ended. For years he had lived as though Audrey still controlled the doors of his life. Sarah had understood something he had not. The past had already left. He was the one still holding it inside. Henry barely slept that night. At work the next morning, he saw Sarah laughing with Mason, and felt an emotion he immediately rejected. Jealousy. Impossible. Yet when Mason leaned closer to show Sarah something on his phone, Henry slowed as he passed. Mason noticed and smiled knowingly. "Morning, Mr. Harrison?" Henry ignored him. Sarah handed Henry a folder. "You look tired." "I am fine." "You always say that." "Because it is usually true." She held the folder another second after he grasped it. Their eyes met. Henry felt that same dangerous warmth. Sarah released it. "Whatever you say, boss." By afternoon, Henry concluded he needed even stricter boundaries. He called Sarah into his office. "No unnecessary conversations from now on." She folded her arms. "Again?" "Yes." "No jokes?" "Correct." "No staring." Henry's expression tightened. "I do not stare." Sarah smiled. "Then you won't mind stopping." She turned to leave. Henry watched her reach the door and suddenly heard himself ask, "Are you free for dinner?" Sarah looked over her shoulder. Silence stretched between them. Is unnecessary conversation served before or after dessert? It is a business dinner. Naturally. They ate at a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. Sarah inspected the menu. These prices seem personally offended by ordinary people. Henry almost smiled. After they ordered, she leaned forward. "Why am I really here?" "I told you. Business." "Yes." Henry. It was the first time she used his name without a title. Something about it dismantled his prepared answer. Sarah studied him. "You're testing yourself." He remained silent. "You want to know why touching me doesn't affect you the way touching other women does." His fingers tightened around the water glass. "You have remarkable confidence in your theories. I also have remarkable evidence." When he drove her home, they sat quietly outside her building. Before leaving, Sarah asked. Are you afraid of me? No. Then what are you afraid of? Henry looked toward the windshield. I don't know. Sarah opened the door. He finally spoke. What did you do to me? She paused. Nothing. Then she smiled gently. Maybe that's the point. Over the following days, Henry tried avoiding her. It failed. The elevator doors opened. Sarah was there. He entered the break room. Sarah was making tea. He stayed late. Sarah was completing reports. Eventually, she walked into his office and closed the door. Enough. Henry looked up. Excuse me? You have spent days pretending I'm invisible. I've been busy. You're a terrible liar. She approached his desk. You're afraid. Sarah, prove me wrong. She extended her hand and lightly touched his wrist. Henry went still. But this time he did not move away immediately. Sarah looked at him with less humor than before. What happens when I touch you? He swallowed. I remember that I can feel something. The confession surprised them both. Sarah slowly removed her hand. For once, she did not tease him. That evening Henry stood alone in his office, staring across Charlotte's lights. He finally understood that Sarah had not magically cured anything. She had simply reached him before his fear could explain why he should run. A few nights later, another corporate reception was held on a rooftop overlooking the city. Sarah attended as part of the executive team. Henry tried focusing on investors. Then he saw Noah Carter, a charismatic entrepreneur, speaking with her. Noah placed a friendly hand near Sarah's waist while guiding her through the crowded terrace. Henry's restraint disappeared. He crossed the room. Sarah, I need to speak with you. She looked puzzled. Right now? Yes. Away from the crowd, Sarah confronted him. What was that? He was touching you. So? I didn't like it. Her eyebrows rose. Are you jealous? No. Then why does it matter? Henry had spent years answering questions with strategy. There was no strategy for this one. Sarah stepped closer. If another man did the same thing tomorrow, you wouldn't care? Henry looked at her. Every defense he possessed suddenly seemed childish. He leaned forward and kissed her. It lasted only a moment before he pulled away, stunned by his own decision. Sarah stared at him. Henry's fear returned. That should not have happened. Her expression changed. You cannot keep doing this. Doing what? Wanting something and calling it a mistake the second it becomes real. She walked away. Henry remained beneath the rooftop lights, surrounded by hundreds of people, feeling more alone than he had when he arrived. After the rooftop incident, Sarah stopped chasing answers. That affected Henry more than anger would have. She remained polite at work, but treated him exactly as she treated every other executive. When he entered a room, she did not search for his reaction. When he passed her desk, she continued typing. On Friday evening, Henry visited a quiet lounge after work, hoping unfamiliar surroundings would silence his thoughts. They did not. Then Sarah walked in with Mason and several colleagues. Henry watched from across the room. Mason noticed him first. Sarah noticed next. She met Henry's eyes, smiled politely, and returned to her conversation. Something in Henry finally broke. He approached. Can we talk? Sarah glanced toward Mason. Mason raised both hands. I am staying completely out of whatever this is. Henry led Sarah toward a quieter corner. She folded her arms. You have a few minutes. Were you here with Mason? Her eyes widened. That is your important question. I'm asking. And I'm asking why you care. Henry stared at her. Sarah stepped closer. What do you want from me? He had avoided that question, because the answer frightened him. Instead of speaking, he kissed her again. This time, when he drew back, Sarah did not look surprised. Still a mistake? Henry closed his eyes. He wanted to say no. Fear spoke first. I don't know. Sarah shook her head. That answer is going to cost you something someday. Days later, she sent him a message late in the evening. She was downstairs at his apartment building. Henry could have ignored it. Instead, he let her upstairs. Sarah arrived wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking more like herself than she had at any corporate event. You really are difficult, she said. I've been told. Mostly by me. They sat together, talking more honestly than ever before. Henry told her parts of what Audrey had done. He admitted that after the betrayal, withdrawing from people had felt safer than learning whom to trust. Sarah listened without interrupting. You built a rule because one person hurt you. It worked. Did it? Henry looked around the enormous, immaculate apartment. For the first time, he saw how empty it was. Sarah touched his hand. He did not withdraw. Henry leaned closer and kissed her again. But when the moment became emotionally overwhelming, his old instinct returned. He stepped away. Sarah waited. I'm sorry, he said. You don't have to apologize for needing time. Henry could barely look at her. This was a mistake. The hurt on her face appeared instantly. That part you should apologize for. Sarah? No. She picked up her purse. You were frightened. I would have understood frightened. You could have said you needed time. But every time something matters to you, you insult it before it can hurt you. Henry had no defense. At the door, Sarah turned. You're not protecting yourself anymore. You're punishing everyone who tries to care about you. Then she left. For several days, Henry became almost invisible inside his own company. Eventually, Sarah waited near his car after work. Are you going to avoid me forever? I thought you wanted distance. I want honesty. She placed her hand over his on the car door. Do you want me in your life? Henry closed his eyes. The answer was terrifying, because it was simple. Yes. Then say that instead of everything else. He looked at her. Yes. I want you. Sarah's expression softened. And if you panic again, I probably will. Then tell me you're afraid. Don't tell me I'm a mistake. Rain began tapping against the pavement. Henry laughed unexpectedly. Sarah stared. What? I believe the weather is mocking me. She smiled. That might be the first sensible thing you've said all week. They got into the car and talked while rain covered the windshield. Henry admitted he had no idea how to build a relationship. Sarah answered, Neither do I. People learn. What if I ruin it? Then we repair what can be repaired. For Henry, that sentence was revolutionary. In business, failure meant replacing the failed system. Sarah was telling him relationships worked differently. They required repair. In the following weeks, he changed slowly. He allowed himself to enjoy coffee with her. He stopped inventing reasons to leave elevators. Sometimes he even initiated small gestures of affection. Mason noticed everything. One morning he entered Henry's office, saw Sarah sitting comfortably opposite the desk, and said, Should I come back after the corporate thaw? Henry gave him a look. Sarah laughed. For the first time, Henry laughed too. The sound surprised all three of them. Henry had spent decades mastering the appearance of strength. Sarah was teaching him something far harder: how to remain present when strength was no longer enough. For a while, their relationship existed quietly between them. At work, Sarah remained Henry's assistant. Outside the office, they ate together, walked through Charlotte's quieter neighborhoods, visited small cafes, and occasionally drove beyond the city toward Lake Norman when Henry needed somewhere without boardrooms or cameras. Sarah began seeing parts of him his employees never knew existed. He loved old jazz records. He could cook exactly 3 meals and considered that sufficient culinary expertise. He read history before sleeping. He hated crowded elevators but loved thunderstorms. Henry learned things about Sarah, too. She called her mother every Sunday. She saved postcards from every city she visited. She secretly wanted to start a foundation helping young adults from low-income families enter professional careers. Their connection grew because it was no longer built merely on attraction or curiosity. They became friends. That frightened Henry even more. One evening, Sarah sat across from him at his apartment. "How long are we going to hide this?" Henry looked confused. "Hide what?" She stared at him. "Us. We aren't hiding. Your closest executives think I suddenly became very interested in working late." Henry shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's voice softened. "Are you ashamed of being with me?" "No." "Then why do I disappear whenever other people enter the room?" Henry looked down. The answer had nothing to do with embarrassment. He feared attachment becoming public because public things felt permanent. And permanent things could be lost. Sarah understood before he explained. "You think if nobody knows, losing me would hurt less." Henry said nothing. She reached across the table. "I am not Audrey." His jaw tightened. "I know. Do you?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "I cannot promise that life will never change. Nobody can. But I can promise I'm here now. If you spend every good day preparing for the worst one, you never actually live the good days." Henry wanted to believe her. Instead, fear made him retreat again. At an executive meeting days later, he became excessively formal toward Sarah. When she offered an idea, he addressed her as though they were strangers. Afterward, she followed him into his office. "Enough." Henry turned. "We are working." "No, you're hiding." "Sarah, you want me when nobody can see us, then behave like knowing me is dangerous when people are watching. That isn't fair. Then tell me what is fair." Henry could feel the walls closing in. Sarah stepped closer. "Do you want this relationship?" "Yes." "Then stand inside it." He could not. Fear found the cruelest available escape. "Maybe we should end it." Sarah became completely still. Henry regretted the sentence before it finished leaving his mouth. She picked up her bag. "Congratulations. Sarah, you finally found the safest possible relationship." She opened the door. One that doesn't exist. For the next several days, the company returned to the way Henry once preferred it. Quiet, predictable, orderly. He discovered he hated it. Sarah remained professional, but the warmth was gone. Henry slept poorly. Meals went unfinished. His apartment felt less like a home than an expensive waiting room. Mason finally confronted him. "You look terrible." "I'm fine." "No, you look like someone replaced your blood with quarterly reports." Henry glared. Mason sat anyway. "I have worked for you a long time. You were difficult before, Sarah. Now you're miserable. This is none of your business." "Probably not." Mason stood. "But someone should tell you that avoiding pain is not the same as having a life." That weekend, Henry saw a photograph online. Sarah was out with friends. Beside her stood a man Henry did not recognize. She looked happy. Henry's first reaction was jealousy. His second was far worse. He imagined Sarah building a life where he gradually became nothing more than a former employer and an old mistake. For nearly 20 years, Henry had feared being abandoned. Now he understood the bitter irony. Sarah had not abandoned him. He had pushed her out. Henry left his apartment immediately. He found the restaurant where Sarah and her friends were gathered. She saw him approaching and sighed. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk." "You ended things." "I know. And now you appear because you saw me with someone?" Henry swallowed his pride. "Yes." Sarah almost laughed. At least that answer was honest. "Please." The word felt unfamiliar in Henry's mouth. Sarah noticed. She followed him outside. Under the streetlights, Henry finally stopped negotiating with fear. "I love you." Sarah stared. He repeated it. "I love you, Sarah." Her eyes filled with emotion, but she did not step toward him. "I waited a long time to hear that." "I know. And now I don't know whether saying it is enough." Henry's chest tightened. "What do I do?" Sarah looked at him steadily. "Prove you can live the truth, when it is inconvenient, not only when you're afraid of losing me." Then she returned inside. Henry remained alone on the sidewalk. For once, however, he did not feel defeated. He had finally been given the right problem to solve. The following morning, Sarah arrived at Harrison Holdings, expecting an ordinary workday. Instead, employees were gathered near the executive corridor. Mason appeared beside her. "What happened?" He grinned. "I think Henry finally became more afraid of losing you than of embarrassing himself." The elevators opened. Henry stepped out carrying a bouquet. He looked nothing like the polished chief executive employees knew. His tie was slightly crooked, his jacket wrinkled, and his expression openly nervous. Sarah stared. Henry walked directly toward her. Dozens of employees pretended not to watch. Nobody succeeded. He stopped beside her desk. Sarah Adams. She slowly stood. "What are you doing?" "Something overdue." He looked around the office. "For years, everyone here knew my rules. They knew what I avoided, what I refused, and how far away people were supposed to stand." The room became silent. Henry looked back at Sarah. "I let everyone know my fear. I think it's time they know my choice." Sarah's eyes filled. Henry took her hand. No hesitation. No recoil. Several employees exchanged astonished looks. Henry continued. "I treated you as though caring about you made me weak. It didn't. Running from you made me weak." Sarah swallowed hard. "I cannot promise I will suddenly become easy." A laugh traveled through the office. Mason muttered, "Impossible." Henry glanced toward him. More laughter followed. Then Henry faced Sarah again. "But I can promise, I will stop making you pay for something someone else did 20 years ago." That mattered more to Sarah than flowers or spectacle. She squeezed his hand. "That's a much better speech." "I practiced." "I can tell." Months passed. Henry did not transform overnight. He occasionally withdrew when frightened. The difference was that now he recognized it. Instead of disappearing, he learned to say, "I need time." Sarah learned that supporting him did not mean accepting every bad decision. She challenged him when necessary, and respected his limits when they were honest, rather than defensive. Mason became an unlikely ally, often reminding Henry that emotional intelligence could not be delegated to an assistant. Alice Bennett, who had worked near Henry for years, watched the changes with quiet amazement. One afternoon she told Sarah, "People say you changed him." Sarah shook her head. "No, he changed himself. I just gave him a reason to notice he could." That distinction became important. Henry started speaking with a counselor privately, recognizing that a wound carried for decades deserved more than romance as treatment. He did not tell Sarah because he wanted praise. He told her because he wanted transparency. She smiled. "I'm proud of the decision. So am I." For Henry, those words were strangely powerful. Almost a year after Sarah's first disastrous tie assignment, Henry took her back to the charity venue where Audrey had first encountered them together. This time he was not there for business. They stepped onto a quiet terrace overlooking Charlotte. Sarah glanced at him. "You're behaving suspiciously. I am attempting to be romantic. That explains why you look terrified." Henry laughed. Then he reached into his jacket. Sarah's teasing expression vanished. He held a small ring box but did not immediately kneel. "I almost proposed publicly at the office months ago." "You did?" I realized afterward that grand gestures are impressive, but you deserved a question that belonged to us." He lowered himself onto one knee. Sarah covered her mouth. Henry looked up. 20 years ago, I thought one person proved love could not be trusted. You taught me one person cannot represent the whole world." His voice became quieter. "You never asked me to become fearless. You only asked me to stop letting fear make my decisions." Sarah was crying now. "Will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears. "Yes." Henry slipped the ring onto her finger and stood. Sarah embraced him. Years earlier, being held would have made his body tense. Now Henry closed his eyes and held her back. Below them, Charlotte glowed beneath the evening sky. The city had not changed. His past had not disappeared. Audrey's betrayal had still happened. 20 lonely years still existed. But those years no longer possessed authority over the years ahead. Henry finally understood that healing did not require rewriting yesterday. It required refusing to let yesterday write tomorrow. Their wedding took place several months later at a small estate outside Charlotte, surrounded by tall oaks and gardens beginning to bloom. Sarah deliberately rejected the enormous ballroom Henry's event planners suggested. "I already work for a billionaire," she told him. "I refuse to marry one inside something resembling a royal summit." So they invited family, close friends, trusted colleagues, and several people who had become important during their journey. Mason served as Henry's best man. Alice helped Sarah prepare. Even Noah Carter attended and cheerfully informed Henry that his harmless conversation with Sarah at the rooftop reception deserved recognition for accelerating the relationship. Henry replied, "You are not receiving credit." Before the ceremony, Sarah stood before a mirror while Alice adjusted the back of her dress. "Nervous?" "A little." Alice smiled. "Henry is worse." "Good." Outside, Mason stood beside Henry, beneath an arch covered in white flowers. Henry adjusted his tie repeatedly. Mason finally stopped his hand. "You have redone that knot 6 times. Something feels wrong." "Your assistant usually fixes it." Henry looked at him. Mason smiled. "Soon to be your wife." Then the music began. Henry turned. Sarah appeared at the end of the garden path. For several seconds, he forgot the guests, the ceremony, and every carefully planned sentence. He remembered another morning almost a year earlier. A nervous new assistant. An office full of ties. A hand reaching toward his collar before either of them understood what that small gesture would uncover. Sarah reached him. Henry took her hand willingly. "You look beautiful." She studied him. "You look terrified." "I am." "Good. We're being honest now." He laughed. Their vows were simple. Sarah promised not to confuse patience with silence, and not to stop challenging him when fear disguised itself as logic. Henry promised to remember that love was not something a person secured once and possessed forever. It was something they chose repeatedly through ordinary days, difficult conversations, apologies, and courage. When the ceremony ended, Mason delivered a speech, recounting the legendary tie incident. Employees laughed when he described how a woman who knew nothing about Henry's rule broke 2 decades of company protocol before lunch on her first day. Later, Henry and Sarah danced beneath strings of lights. He was not particularly skilled. Sarah did not care. Near the end of the evening, they walked away from the reception toward the quiet edge of the property. Henry looked at the distant lights. "I spent years believing being untouched meant being safe." Sarah rested her head lightly against him. "And were you?" Henry considered the question. "No, I was only alone." He had reached an age when achievements were supposed to provide answers. He had built companies, negotiated contracts worth more money than he once imagined possessing, and learned how to make decisions while entire rooms waited for his judgment. Yet none of that knowledge had taught him the simplest truth. A protected heart and a peaceful heart were not the same thing. Pain could teach useful lessons, but it could also teach false ones. Audrey's betrayal had taught Henry to be careful, and carefulness had slowly hardened into suspicion. Suspicion became distance. Distance became habit. By the time 2 decades passed, he had forgotten he was still obeying a decision made by a wounded younger man. Growing older did not automatically make someone wiser. Sometimes age merely gave old fears more time to become respectable. Sarah had not rescued him. That mattered deeply to Henry. No person should be given the impossible responsibility of repairing another human being simply by loving them enough. Sarah had opened a door, but Henry still had to walk through it. He had to admit when he was wrong, seek help, apologize without excuses, and learn that vulnerability was not surrender. He also understood something about forgiveness. Forgiving the past did not mean pretending it had caused no harm. It meant refusing to continue paying interest on an old debt. For years, Henry had believed Audrey took 20 years from him. Standing beside Sarah, he realized the harder truth was that, after Audrey left, he had continued giving those years away himself. That realization might have become another regret. Instead, he chose gratitude. Life had not come too late. Love had not arrived too late. As long as a person was still capable of choosing differently, there was still time to build something honest from what remained. Sarah took his hand. Henry looked down at their joined fingers and smiled. Once, a touch had represented everything he feared losing. Now it reminded him that closeness always involved risk, because every meaningful thing in life could be lost. But avoiding love did not defeat loss. It only guaranteed emptiness in advance. Henry squeezed Sarah's hand. For the first time in almost 20 years, he no longer measured his life by what could hurt him. He measured it by what was worth staying for. And when Sarah led him back toward the lights, the music, their friends, and the life waiting beyond that evening, Henry followed without hesitation.